ask everyone something. What's easier, telling somebody that a batter stepped in the batter's box and hit a ball with a large trajectory and it actually went over the left field wall? Or is it easier, instead of describing all that detail, if I just said we got a home run? Obviously, it's easier to say we got a home run. So this is an example of taking a block of information and just using one statement to represent a mutual understanding of a particular event. Now, in Python and in other languages, we call that a function. Now, in some languages, you cannot have a function unless you explicitly state it inside of a class. So a function inside of a class is called a method. But Python is all about making things, I'm going to say, less wordy, so you are able to use standalone functions and be productive. All right, the basic function is a mere code block. So we'll start off with the most basic function that you can think of. We start off with the keyword def, meaning define function, and this represents the name of the function, and these two, A and B, represent what we call parameters. And the function body is here, and all we're doing is we're printing the result of A multiplied by B. So how do we actually call the function? Here we call the function m, and we place our parameters 40 and 3, and we wind up with 120. Now the weakness of this is that if we equivocate the function to a variable name named x, if we say x equals the 40 times 3 or a times b, we still wind up with 120. Well, what happens when we want to print the value of x and we get none? So what's happening here is, yes, from a syntactical perspective, this is a function. But from a value perspective, it doesn't return anything. It's valueless. It's nothing more than a code block. In this following example, or in this next example, we're going to see a real function. And it's going to have several traits or characteristics. And the other thing I want you kind of to understand is that this will be our first program that we're going to be using as a .py file, .py file. So we're going to be using a text editor. For Windows users, you might use Notepad or Notepad++, or you can use VS Code. A proper function has a few elements to it. First off, it should fulfill a value. It should be a value proposition. What I mean by that is that it should return a number or a product or a total or a result or a string in a particular order. Maybe you're taking user input and you're cleaning it up. These are all actions that can be performed by a function. So it should have a return value. Second of all, it should have what they call a docstring. So we're going to go over that in the example. The docstring explains the purpose of the overall function or method. And third of all, it should be documented, meaning it should be commented. In other words, when possible, you should explain why a variable is named the way it is, or you should explain the purpose of this calculation. And that, of course, when you want to make a comment in Python, that is the pound sign. So let's take a look. All right, let's go ahead. We can stream a function that I wrote through a .py program. So we're going to do cat p.py. Cat is a good way to stream smaller programs. And here is what I was talking about. We have the name of the function, and I just called it mult. All we're doing is we are multiplying a parameter A and B, foo and bar. Now, this says here is the docstring. This multiplies foo times bar and returns a total. And I put my initials and the date at which I wrote it. And this is similar to what you will have to do when you are in industry, because all the documentation and all the comments that are here are basically not for you, but it's for the next guy. Okay. And not only that, what I can do is I can actually add a comment. So that's what I'll do here, utilizing Vim as our text editor. And I'll put a comment here. I'll say something like, this result is an int. Now we should clarify, because many times your program is going to be an input through let's say importing it into another program. So the rest of your team members or the rest of the company has to know, like for example, what type of variable this is or what data type this represents. So I'm going to write this, and let's go back and examine it some more. It does also show a return, and it says here is the total. And then you notice that I have the total is as a string data type, and that is because for returns on a function, you cannot concatenate anything other than two strings. This plus sign is the sign for concatenation. So you actually have to concatenate two strings, and that's it. So this total, as you can see, is an int value. So how can we change it from an int to a string for the purposes of concatenation? We actually use str, and then we put the total in parentheses to transform it from the integer data type to the string data type. And finally, we ask it to print the result of mult53, and this is the result. Now, I wanted to talk about something else very quickly. A couple of things. We're going to go into idle, and we are going to get access to that function that we wrote. We're going to import it into this session. Now, the name of the function was b.py. To import that function, all we have to do is literally type b, and it automatically runs the function for us because it actually had an example, two example parameters. Now, we're going to try to get access to the docstring because we want to know what the function actually does. So in order to get to any of the assets of it, because even though we imported it, we have to say, if I just said mult dot and then doc like this, it would wind up with an error because it doesn't know what mult is, even though that's the name of the function. The b.py is the name of the file. So because even though we imported b, we actually had to say b.mult dot and then the doc. This is what we call a special dunder method because it has two underlines before and two underlines after it. We press return and it actually gives us the doc string that we programmed it, so we know what the function did. Finally, we can actually assign a variable to that function. So we can say my var is equal to b.mult, and then we can name two parameters, two new parameters, 4300, and then we can say print my var. Now, the reason why this is a properly written function is because we used a return value to basically create within the function. Because we use a return value, it actually produces an actual real output when you place the function and make it equivalent to a variable. So that's the sign of the fact that it is a well-written function. It has a return value.